Somebody once told me. Somebody once told. Allah Akbar! Allah Akbar! Bitch,
Yo, 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 yo.
Yo, 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 yo.
So the presentation is going to be pretty pretty ghetto. I expected to. I was planning on writing it, like drafting it on the whiteboard and then putting it on the paper. But not only did I run out of time, I'm also out of paper. So instead, I have the pictures that I took of the whiteboard drafts, and I'm just gonna just share my screen and just mark on those as I go. But it shouldn't be so bad. It's just I might have to clarify some words with my draft handwriting.
Okay, well, you're not the only one where stuff seems to have gone wrong. Yeah, so the Hangouts thing is now, it makes perfect sense why Zoom is the one player now, because Hangouts features that were live, as far as I could tell, like years ago, I've definitely made that interview of mine from 2014 with Vitalik was on vanilla Hangouts that I clicked the go live button on YouTube. That's it. I recorded the damn thing. That no longer works. So now basically, if you want to go live, you can go live on your own and like have a chat window in there, or you can hook up streaming software, of which Zoom does seem to be an option, but it's a little bit of a technical option. And Hangouts just seemingly no longer supports the function at all in the vanilla product. Like you've got we have a Google account, so I guess we can figure out how to get that going, but it doesn't look worth it anymore. Zoom seems to have all the stuff we need. It's just unfortunate that Zoom has such a horrible attack surface. So I sent the meeting invite out again to a lot of people, and I also tweeted it out, which I now think was a terrible mistake, because if you're gonna, I'll show you the recording, but some random account called BMXGT joined and basically started blaring, "Somebody once told me."
Well, you can turn on mute on default, right?
Yeah. So when they enter, they mute. But this guy was unmuting himself, and then I was muting him, and he was unmuting himself. And if I mute him again, then he starts yelling, "Allah Akbar!"
Oh my God!
So it was it was pretty crazy. It was pretty insane. So I don't know if we have a drop-off rate or what exactly is going on, but I don't see. There is one guy that I was speaking to who did seem very keen on joining, and who's written quite a bit on DAO design. I guess let's give him another 3 minutes, see if he joins. Let me see if he's.
Yeah. If nobody else joins, I can just present to you. You can at least cover the ground that we agree on.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's more than sufficient. I think if we just keep doing these things, I think we're definitely gaining a nice body of actual useful content and stuff, and we're making progress. Yeah, this morning's meeting with Adam basically made me think that we definitely. I really think we actually put in some pretty good diligence, like in that 2-3 day session we did. I really think the benefits of that is very, very high. And it'd be very interesting for me to map that stuff out for other DAOs, because I think at least DXDAO and Maker that I've looked at, they have so many unintended consequences, that, it's sort of like, it makes me wonder whether or not they can actually survive a really deep analysis from an attacker. So George, how's it going? Now hold on, I need to unmute George, I guess. George, can you hear us?
It looks like he's still muted.
Well, I'm not seeing any audio for him. I can't mute or unmute him.
Okay. Well, in any case, George, we're just waiting a few more minutes to see if anyone else joins, and then I'll do a presentation on Foundry governance. Is George the one that you mentioned had some experience with DAO design?
Yeah, George actually has some nice documents out there that I've only scanned. Unfortunately, George, they are on my reading list for preparing all our comparative DAO presentations that we'll probably make just before we actually kick off the full quality phase of our. Hold on, let me quickly ask him. Let me ask him here. I was about to tell George that we're normally way cooler than this, and lots of people show up to our parties.
But that was just before, or you waited just too long because he decided this party was too lame. And
yeah, he's like, this is
not gonna have any part of
party.
it.
There's no one here, you sucky party people.
So, I was told there'd be bitches and beer. They'd be like, who told you that? This is a Zoom meeting.
No. What we meant to say was we'll be bitching about the lack of beer.
You're right. Yeah.
Clearly only scanned the. How did the experience at Grounded go?
It was fine. I mean, I was in a really weird mood anyway. Something about writing this paper. I actually think what it is that I'd forgotten that there were still big questions that weren't answered. And so I sat down, I'm going to write the white paper. And then I realized slowly, like, oh, that's not the work I have to do first, really. That the work I really have to do is actually, and then that just really fucking took my legs out from under me, just motivation wise. And it's part of the reason I started the fast. Yeah, I'm pretty decided, by the way, on that. I'm going to fast until we launch. I mean, unless my body tells me I'm dying, then I'll eat something.
Can I just weigh in on a few things there?
Sure.
I mean, I don't know how married you are to this fast thing, but okay. So first of all, are you doing snake juice? Are you getting salts and minerals in again, or do you want to try this with normal water?
I'm going to do a bit more research. But I'll probably. Well, I'm going to do more research. I'm not really against having some kind of supplement like that, but yeah, I'm just going to go look for people who've done long fasts, like a month long, and just see what they do. Yeah.
Okay. So there's my first point is that would almost universally, everyone who I've seen who's tried one of these severe diet type situations, like the moment you add salt water into the mix, you go from being able to do like 3 weeks to like 7 weeks type situation, right? Just because you're not leaching out that, and you also feel a lot better. Like all the actual positive mental benefits are there. That's the first thing. The second problem is that please be aware of silent evidence, because the problem is you've got a lot of people out there who basically say things like, "Ooh, I did this fast and it feels so wonderful and it worked out so well for me, yada yada yada." What you don't see is the people who actually like damage their gut biome on their extreme diet or on their like extremely extended fast.
Yeah.
That actually got me, like the stuff I've heard about the damage to your gut biome of extended fasts basically got me to the point where I don't think I will ever attempt longer than 3 days and one feeding in a 3-day period, basically. I must say though, good luck to me and you as you attempt this.
Yeah.
As you attempt this fast. What made you think that this is an idea you want to run with?
Well, honestly, it's so important to me that we launch. I'm so tired of how long it's taken.
Yeah.
And I want to, I think by attaching that goal to eating again, I guess I think I can see, with each passing day, I'm going to be sacrificing more for that effort, whether it's, but like the white paper, for example. I have standards for that white paper, but at this point, it's taken so long to launch. It's time to just rush it at all costs. And if the white paper has a bunch of, we'll write more about this soon, whatever, then that's how it's got to be. I'm so eager to get to the point after we launch. It's just so important. And so that, and, just that, plus the fact that it seems like it's a healthy thing to do. And I got a little bit of chunk I wouldn't mind getting rid of,
Oh, did your child bride give you a little bit of extra carry around with all?
No, I've had that for a long time. It's been a weight on my mind and a weight on my body for years.
Okay.
Years. So I wouldn't mind getting rid of that. And I mean, my main guiding principle is I'm just going to listen to my body, and if it seems like there's an emergency, I'm just going to be open to that. And then that's that's the it's not, I'm not doing this with religious fervor. Exactly. You know what I mean? So
how deep into the thing are you now?
Only a little over a day. I had that was a bad idea. I had some alcohol last night. Not even very much. I didn't have very much, which is good. I poured myself a drink and had about a third of it. And then I already had a headache, and that got worse. Because DeAndre came back yesterday and she brought alcohol. And I was like, well, a little bit will hurt. And I was like, no, I'm just going to stay away from that. So
okay.
I'm also drinking tea. I think I'm going to keep drinking tea in the mornings.
Okay.
But stay away from the coffee though, and the alcohol for sure.
Okay, cool. Listen, I think it's going to be me and you basically. I mean, it's unfortunate that the other folks are not here, but yeah, that is what it is. And I think I think I think what I'll do this week as well is I'll just try to broadcast this in a way that actually has it on calendars, and I'll try to find a way for people to join this meeting like just universally. And I think I think until we like reach way too many people to be able to answer their questions in a meeting, we're going to stick to Zoom, and then we'll just push that stuff out. Okay. All right.
Well, the thing about Zoom, I would still like to prioritize moving to a YouTube live thing because there's so little commitment, so little barriers. Like we could have 2 or 3 people here now, maybe they just didn't show up because Zoom fucked up. Like Zoom, for example, Zoom is buggy. That's the other thing.
Yeah. And it's a security
right now,
all of fucking note. It is a security. Yeah. They just have a very bad reputation.
Yeah. And so like when I join these meetings with a password, first of all, if I go to the web page link, not only does it not open Zoom, but then Zoom fucks up to the point where I have to restart my whole computer. So I can't even click the link. Man. Second of all, if I go and I join, I type in the ID, and then here's what always happens. I type in the ID, and then it thinks for a second, it flashes the password screen, and then it freezes. Yeah. And then I have to exit Zoom, open it again, and put in the meeting ID, and then it'll work. So every time I want to join a meeting, I have to manually enter the ID twice to get past the first crash that seems inevitable. So anyway, I would say prioritize getting to something else, but
are you okay? Hold on, motherfucker. This is okay. I only now see that what's happened. Oh, for heaven's sakes, is the damn password. That's why that guy couldn't like join.
Well, he was here, which means he must have put in the password correctly.
Fuck no! You know what happened? No. He was I don't know if he could join. Maybe he was just trying to join. Maybe it's just showed us a dude trying to join.
I don't think so. I don't think we would have seen him until he put in the password correctly.
Well, whoever the awful was who connected, basically, like, and somebody once told us, basically, he got the password. So I guess, anyway, but you're right. Like Zoom is a problem. The only reason that I prefer Zoom is I just think it increases the engagement in terms of people who actually feel like they're part of the real discussion. Whereas with YouTube, you know, the chat thing just is. I agree there's no barrier to entry, but there's also like, it doesn't really feel like you're getting engaged. You're being engaged with.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, listen, okay. I will then, let me put it this way. There is a way for us to live stream Zoom on YouTube. I won't figure that out next week, Friday. I'll figure that out right now because every Friday I get to this point and then there's something broken. Yeah. So I'll figure that out right after this thing, and then we'll, I'll try to just get the meeting up in general. I'll just go check what the maker guys do with their community meeting, how they manage the passwords, because I don't remember a password there. I just remember joining. Do you remember in their call if we had hoop to jump through?
I just had a link, you know, that's all I remember. I don't even remember what platform it was on.
Okay, cool. Man.
Okay, so
let's kick off.
Shall I start then? Okay.
Yes,
let me share my screen. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, hold on a second. See if you can host. See if you can do it now.
It says I'm the host now, but yes, I can share now.
Okay, cool.
Okay. All right, so here is my very hacky presentation. It's not a PowerPoint presentation. It's literally just these things here, which I'm going to then. This is so ghetto. I'm going to use a screenshot program, and then I'm going to open here. Oh, and then I have all this fucking weird. Can you zoom in a bit? Okay, there we go.
Okay, hold on. George is coming back.
Okay, so I should be able to edit here. Oh, but then.
Listen, can you see George?
No. I can see George. I can't see him. I see him. He's in, but I don't see his video, and he's not unmuted.
Unmute him quickly. Hold on. I'm just going to give him a call on my phone, actually.
I'm going to stop sharing for now and see if I can do that. Oh, he's gone again.
He says he's having some issues, basically. Hi, George. Kalki, how are you, man? I'm all right. Hey, listen, yeah, I mean, it'd be great if you could join the meeting. Yeah, we are not in a specific hurry. Currently, there were quite a few more participants last week, but currently it's literally just me and Logan who're going to run through the thing. And I mean, given the stuff you've written and so forth, it would be cool if if you were around and asking questions. So definitely not necessary, but we are going to record it and post it onto our YouTube channel as well. Okay, sweet, man. Cool. All right, just join whenever, but if it's okay with you, keep trying, and then just join whenever, and we'll circle back to stuff if we need to. Okay. Cool. Bye.
If that guy does not feel engaged with, I don't know what will make him feel engaged.
Yeah. So does it sound like he's going to join, or?
He says he's having some issues, but it does sound like I have convinced him to keep trying. Okay. He's probably going to try from a laptop or something now. Okay, continue.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to be scrolling through these images, and then if I need to change something or demonstrate something, I'll move that other program so I can write over it. But for now, so we're going to start with what is a proposal. So really, there should be a proposal heading up there. I'm assuming you just started the edit.
I'm going to okay. So I'm going to constantly try and take it back a little bit and just let's see if we can sketch the whole picture. Okay. So the purpose of our discussion today is to display what exactly?
Let me just see if I can find anything. Okay, there's no good image to put up while I'm talking about this. But basically, I'm just going to stop sharing just to make it less distracting.
Okay.
In fact, why don't you ask me that question again, and then you can just start the actual released video from here.
Okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, action. All right. So
okay.
All right. So the first question is, what are we going to be displaying today?
So today we're going to talk about sort of the heart and brain of Foundry. Foundry being the DAO that we're starting the sale for, and that is specifically, how does governance work? So Foundry has a bunch of fry holders, and Foundry wants to make decisions. So how do you allow fry holders to propose and vote on these decisions? That's the common problem in designing a DAO, and there's all sorts of issues, one of which is voter apathy. So yeah, we've thought a lot about this. We put together design, and so I'm just going to be going through it'll be centered around what happens to a proposal. How is a proposal created, and what does it go through? And then we'll also talk about delegated voting, which is how if you want someone else to vote for you, you can give your vote to somebody else and they can vote and they can also pass that up to somebody else. And so we'll talk about that as well. But again, the long and short of it is, how does Foundry make decisions, given that the only intelligence it has is the fry holders itself? So it's kind of exploiting the intelligence of the fry holders to actuate decisions. And these, again, I'll talk about this as we go, but the decisions are always Ethereum transactions. So it could be sending DAI somewhere. It could be buying Ether with DAI to rebalance the portfolio. It could be using vertical payments, but I'll talk about that as well when we get there.
Okay, so just as a question that will undoubtedly be raised is, why didn't we just use an Aragon DAO or start a DX DAO or some other existing structure?
Yeah, well, honestly, I think that would be something to write in an article rather than off the cuff. I mean, Aragon specifically, I think that would be a good choice for somebody who, for a group or organization that didn't know Solidity and they wanted to put something up quickly. There's lots of options with Aragon, and it seems like a pretty good project. But for me and you, who are pretty well versed in Solidity, it makes more sense to build it from the ground up and make sure that we are comfortable with how it works. With Aragon, not only do you still have a learning curve, you need to understand the roles and permissions and how all that works together. But then, aside from that, just from the perspective of you and me and Team Toast, we won't have the same level of assurance as we would if we build it from the ground up. And I don't think that they have all the things that we want. For example, our token sale, we didn't really find anything in their stuff that would do the token sale in the way we want. And same with the liquid democracy, the whole delegated voting thing. So yeah. But as for the other ones, I think we'll have to release more specific documentation for that.
Yeah, just for my own answer as well, as I think at this stage, there are things we know about these. We know about how DAOs work, but it's not a lot. We really don't know a lot about how DAOs work. It's very clear.
We as in the community, we as in the Ethereum community and the blockchain community in general don't know an awful lot about how DAOs work. If you look at something like Bitcoin and Ethereum themselves, they are DAOs, but they have incredibly strange structures really on how they make decisions. I mean, it's a strange way of thinking about the problems, and it's not really clear for the type of thing that we're trying to build, which is essentially a fund that invests in other projects, what the best model would be. It's not even really clear from the writing that I've encountered whether or not you want several of these things or whether or not you want one giant monolithic one that has somehow gained the capacity to make all manner of decision, right? So I think at this point, the only way really forward is to address what we do know. So we do know certain things are a serious issue. Like we do know voter apathy is an issue. We do know that things like 51% attacks are a serious issue. We do know that software vulnerabilities are a serious issue. So the things we do know about, I think we need to actually address and also trim the immediately obvious unintended consequences. We'll probably cover that a little bit in this talk, but yeah. So I think we're at the stage now where we need to do more experimentation, but also address the things we do know could go wrong. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Okay. Shall I start with the first ghetto slide?
Yeah, go ghetto.
Okay. Oops. Share. Okay, so here's the first ghetto slide. I expected to have a bunch of big paper that I could put on the whiteboard and redraft this stuff, but I didn't have paper. So I just had to take a bunch of pictures of my whiteboard drawings. And just let me know, Skalk, if something is not readable.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to start with what a proposal is. I really should have been heading up here that says proposal. So this is the, well, I guess I have it right up here. Proposal structure, that's what this is.
Okay.
And a proposal basically has a bond and a transaction. There's really nothing else about a proposal. I guess it would also contain the information about who made the proposal, but we can get to that in a second. the main things are there's a bond and a transaction. The transaction I'll talk about first. It's simpler to explain. It's just any Ethereum transaction for the treasury to execute. The treasury is what holds all the assets. It's what holds the ENS domains. And really the treasury can be thought of as just a smart contract wallet. It's just a wallet that holds cryptocurrency and does smart contract actions, but has an owner. And in this case, the owner is, well, it's the system that we're describing right now. I should also say that we should call this a transaction payload.
Okay.
Just to keep things specific. So these transaction payloads, they could be for sending DAI from the treasury, which could be for paying somebody to do some work. It could also be a variable payment, which is just a sort of a game theoretically more secure way of essentially paying for work. You could do something with DeFi where let's say we have a bunch of DAI and it's just sitting there. We could put in a savings type account in theory. We could use liquidity like Uniswap. So we can make a Uniswap. We could provide liquidity to Uniswap and actually make money that way. We could also just rebalance assets. So if we have all DAI and we want 50% Ethereum, we could do that too. But I think of all these, the more interesting ones are the top two here because we're going to be, Foundry would want to be making decisions to go build products that make profit for Foundry. What those projects are, I don't think that's really in the scope of this talk, but we've written quite a bit about it, and there'd be a bit more in our white paper as well. So that's a transaction payload. It's basically any Ethereum transaction sent from the treasury as the treasury. Okay. The bond is an amount of Fry. It's a skin in the game for the proposer, and it's a certain amount of Fry. And the amount of Fry that they have to attach to this proposal is based entirely on the number of active propositions. So I'll get down here in a second, but if I just zoom out a bit, if there's already 4 existing proposals and we're trying to make a 5th proposal, then that means that we would say that there's 4 active proposals here, and this is going to go on an exponential curve. So this 4th proposal is going to cost quite a bit more than any of these previous ones. And the reason we want to do that is just to limit the amount of proposals that are active at a certain time, so that when you have voters who come and look at all the decisions to be made, there's not 100. Because if there's 100, you start risking scammy or attacking proposals getting through just because people aren't really paying enough attention. Yeah. So this bond, part of the role of the bond is just about limiting the throughput. And then the other part is about punishing the proposer if the proposal is deemed an attack, which we'll talk about in a later slide. So yeah, just here, all I'm really saying here is if a person wants to make a proposal, they put a bond with a transaction payload, and then they pop it in there. And that's pretty much all it takes. Technically speaking, to make the transaction payload is a little technical, but basically it's, when you send crypto from your wallet, there's a transaction data, and then you attach a signature to it. And in this case, you would make the transaction data, but you wouldn't sign it because it's not you that is going to actuate the proposal. It's the founder. So you get the data, and then you package that, and we'll probably build some tools to make that easier. So that is sort of what a proposal is. It's just a bond with a transaction, and it goes in this, I'm starting to call it a queue of active proposals. And you can see that each of these proposals have time left. So this one has 10 hours, 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, and then 8 days. The way this timer works is that's the minimum time that it would take for this thing to either pass or fail, and it could take longer, which we'll talk about in the next slide.
Okay. So I don't know if you featured this later in the slide, but what is the purpose of the bond? What happens to the bond? Okay.
I do talk about that later. For now, I would say just the best thing to say for now is that it's skin in the game. So this guy has to put the bond in, and if he's put the first proposal in, it's not going to be very much. As there's more proposals, he's going to have to put more and more money in. The assumption, basically, to summarize it now, is that if he doesn't anger the Fry voters, he should get that back. Whether the proposal passes or fails, he'll get that money back. He only won't get it back if he's deemed an attacker.
Okay, so can I maybe state what an example of a proposal would be, and you tell me if that's correct or wrong. Okay, so for instance, I want to build rockets on the blockchain, and I think the rockets on the blockchain deserve some DAI from the Foundry, and I come here and I basically say, okay, well, my payload is simple. I just want $10 million, and then
so
I would.
To be clear, the payload would be send $10,000 or whatever you said, $1 million from the treasury to my address. That would be the transaction payload.
Yeah, exactly. Send $10 million from Foundry to my my.
It's like a blank check, and you're saying, please sign this check, please.
Please sign this check. Yeah. So and then I would have to put up a bond, which would be calculated depending on how many existing other people there are with the proposal. And then I'd put up the bond and basically put that in there. And then those two things combined is what the fry holders then vote on. So obviously this is not a very good proposal. So theoretically they should strike this down. Yeah, okay, but that's one example of a proposal. I suppose a more complex proposal would be something like the Foundry owns an ENS domain and we want to sell the ENS domain. And then what we do is we basically, the payload is transfer this ENS domain to another smart contract that might be some sort of an escrow contract where if the ENS domain comes in, the money we get for the ENS domain comes out again. So,
I think even a maybe more interesting example, if you're talking about ENS domains, is actually upgrading. So our two products that we have right now, we have DieHard and Smoke Signal. Smoke Signal is currently on a .eth domain, and if Foundry wants to upgrade Smoke Signal, then that also would be a proposal that comes through here. So, I or somebody else would upgrade Smoke Signal, and there'd be a version of it somewhere on GitHub, I suppose. And then you would upload that to IPFS. That's because that's where Smoke Signal lives right now on an IPFS hash. And then you'd say, hey guys, here's the hash of the new version. I propose we upgrade the ENS domain. And that would be the transaction payload in here.
Okay. Okay, cool.
All right, next slide. Any questions?
I'm good.
Okay. Okay, so proposal lifecycle. So let's see, where should I really start here? I'll just start right here. So when you, let me first explain this graph. So a proposal is, its support is determined by the number of yes votes divided by the number of total votes, total with an asterisk. It's not exactly total, but I'll get to that a bit later. But basically it's if there's 20 yeses and there's 10 no's, then you'd have 66%. And if a proposal, let's see, where exactly to start yet? Okay, so when I make a proposal at first, there's not going to be any supporting votes for it in that instant. And at that point, it's going to default to failing. There's two sort of states a proposal can be in before it has been ultimately passed or failed, and that can be failing or passing. And that is based on whether it's above or below the 60% line. Now, the 60% is a value that we might change. A lot of the hard values in here might change, like this 8-day one, which I'll talk about in a minute, is another thing we could change. But the logic here is pretty solid as far as what we might change. So okay, so at t equals 0. So the first instant, there's no votes yet cast. It defaults to failing. And now at that point, if nothing else happens, if no one else sees it, even if the original proposer doesn't go and vote on it, it's just in 8 days it will fail, and then it will be ready to reject, which I'll talk about in a bit. But basically, it just means that anyone can poke it out of the queue. It falls out, and then that's the end of the story. And the proposer gets his deposit back unless he's deemed an attacker, which again we'll talk about in a bit. But then let's say instead of nothing happening, I'm just going to zoom in here if I can. So let's say a bit after you get 10 yes votes, that's the first action that's happened. So that moves this the approval, or maybe I suppose you could say the rating of the proposal up to 100%, because there's been 10 votes total and 10 of them were yes. So now it moves up here. Now every time it crosses this line, which I put a little exclamation point by, the 8-day timer resets. So that's why this 8-day time is the minimum value, because if it gets no action, that's how long it will take to fail. But every time it passes, it resets. And so let's say that a little bit later, you get 15 no votes. That's going to move it down to below the approval rating. It turns into failing, and then the timer is reset again. And so eventually, as more people pile on, so here's 100 yes votes, it knocks it way up here. And eventually it's going to stabilize at a certain point because everybody will have voted on it. Yeah, it will. I mean, people won't be changing their votes, and it'll trend towards some approval. So at that point, 8 days after it switches for the last time, it will then become ready to execute if it's above the 60% line, or it'll become ready to reject.
Okay.
And the way that those, let's see here. Okay, this is just what I've just described. When it's ready to execute or reject, anyone can trigger it. It's ready to just go or be rejected. Okay. The proposition is removed from the queue. So again, whether that's rejected or accepted, it's no longer an active proposal. Okay. And then if it's an execute, then it just performs the transaction payload. So then again, that's sending DAI or transferring the ENS domain or updating the ENS domain, as we talked about earlier. So that's the basic behavior there. And then the only other thing to talk about is when we say the total, there's actually 4 ways you can vote. One is abstain, so I'm not talking about that here. Abstain doesn't count towards the total here. But there's yes, no, and burn. And again, we'll talk about the no and burn here in a bit. But if there's, just as an example, if there's 10 yes votes, 10 no votes, and 1 no and burn votes, then the math is 10 over the total, which is 21. That's 48%, and that's failing. Okay. So yeah, hit me with your questions now.
Okay, so what is the first question? What does no and burn mean?
So we'll get to that in a bit, but basically you're indicating that you believe this has been an attack, and that will impact whether the guy gets his bond back or not. So maybe a simple way to say it is if there are no votes of no and burn, then the guy will definitely get his proposal back. If there are some, then it's not necessarily guaranteed. Okay.
Okay, so quick question. So just if you scroll up a bit.
Oops.
So what is like to prevent me from, let's say I had quite a bit of fry tokens and there's a thing that passes and I wait until just before the end of the 8 days, and then I've been voting yes, and then I vote no all of a sudden, pushing it back down to the other side and just creating churn there.
Right. Well, I mean, I suppose you could, if you have a large section of votes and you want to just delay the proposal and it's yes, you could just vote no. That's fine. I suppose that is mischief that you could make. But as we're going to talk about delegated voting, so if you have that power because people have delegated their votes to you, they can just move away from you. And that will actually impact the proposal in question, which we'll talk about a bit later. Okay. But your capacity for mischief is pretty limited because any support that you get by people delegating their votes to you can move as soon as you make them regret that decision. They can move to another delegate. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so in other words, there are other people whose voting power you might have on board, and they might, if you purposefully try to harm the thing, then the rational thing for them would be to delegate away from you, removing your capacity to keep harming the DAO. Okay, right. What's the quorum? Is there a quorum here?
It's not, well, so the definition of quorum, I think, is a little tricky, but basically if you don't vote, you don't impact the vote. So this 60% is just 60% of the total who have voted. So basically if you make a proposal and no one votes on it, but you vote your one fry on it and it's a yes, and it stays that way for a week, it'll get passed, or not a week, but 8 days. So there's no minimum amount of votes that's needed.
Okay, and why did we decide on that?
Well, we're limiting the throughput of active proposals. So there's only going to be, what, 5, 10, 15 at the most, because the amount that you have to bond for each proposal grows exponentially. And so we're assuming that there will be fry holders with their voting weight. And when I say voting weight, I just mean how much their fry is worth plus everyone that's delegated to them.
Mm-hmm. And
it's just not going to be much work for them to look through the proposals and say no on the stuff they don't like. And we can also do a lot of stuff with the interface itself. So when you're viewing these proposals, we could just simply order them by how close they are to passing or failing. And so, and if we have a whole 8 days, it's just pretty inconceivable as this dud or spam, whatever makes it a bad proposal, it's going to come near the top and it's going to be hours away from passing. And then if it's only 10 yes votes, someone with 11 no votes can go knock that and then reset the timer. And then as more people do that, again, as more people come in and weigh in on the decision, it will trend towards some support level.
Okay, yeah. So in other words, what we're saying is we don't view the quorum requirement as necessary because there will be very little to look at due to the bonding system. If this is a malicious vote and somebody passes it with like basically no tokens, because it's very straightforward to see it happening, you could very easily knock it down again.
Yeah. And we can also play with this 8 day. We chose 8 days because it's 1 day longer than a week. So that just means anybody on any week schedule could check every Saturday or every Wednesday or whatever is easy for them. And they could see all the proposals. Nothing will pass without them seeing it. But we could change that as well to be longer. We could also, this is something I was just thinking of earlier, Scott. We could somehow relate this 8 days to the bond amount and allow people to bond more to get things to pass potentially quicker. That's just an idea though. If we want to sort of have an emergency proposal scheme. But anyway, that's just an idea. Certainly not something we're designing in right now.
Okay, cool. Okay, I just want to comment on something. Obviously, it's sort of like interviewee style, but I mean, obviously, me and Logan came up with lots of this. But so part of what we're trying to accomplish here as well is to not necessarily force everyone to vote, right? That it's still a little bit up in our rewards for voting system is still a little bit up in the air, and our punishments for not voting system is still a little bit up in the air. But part of what we want to accomplish is if there is a contentious vote of some sort where someone might fundamentally agree that it needs to happen or it needs to not happen, but to signal that publicly
is dangerous.
Like either it could cost them reputation, it could get them into problems in some jurisdiction somewhere on the planet. Then they could just abstain, and the proposal itself could still meet the quorum requirements, which is nothing in this case essentially. It could still meet the quorum requirements to actually pass. And since they didn't intervene, and they didn't need to intervene for it to go either direction, the people who are interested in this, who might be pseudonymous or anonymous actors, can actually push the vote in one or another direction, basically.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess I was going to talk about delegated voting next, but let me just skip ahead a bit and talk about voting options since we're on that topic now. So there's yes and no. They're pretty unsurprising there. Yes, you're saying Foundry should execute this. No, you're saying Foundry should not execute this. Now, no and burn counts as a no in terms of whether the proposal passes or not. But you're also basically saying this proposal is wasteful of my time or an attempted attack on Foundry. Punish the proposer. That looks like punish. But anyway, that's supposed to be punish.
Well,
and so now, this is something we haven't really figured out all the details on, but basically what this means is that there should either with enough of these no and burn votes, then the proposer's bond should be entirely burned, or we can burn the proposer's bond proportional to how many people voted that. So 10% said no and burn, and then 90% said some other option, then we would burn 10% of their bond. But the idea here is basically, whatever the details are here, you give people the option to punish proposals that they see that they believe were in bad faith, and so that should really discourage any attempted scams or attacks or sort of junk proposals. Yeah, especially because you need a solid 8 days of support to get anything passed. And as it approaches that passing period, it'll get more and more visibility. And again, it's only 1 out of 10 or 15 of these at most.
Yeah. So so let's take an example basically. So either I come along as a troll and I go, send me all the money in the treasury, bahaha, and I post that. So that would be a very clear no and burn. So the bond I had to put up is going to get destroyed if I attempt that. Right. And if I'm in the beginning of the queue, maybe at the beginning of the DAO, it might be affordable to try this a couple of times, but I'll guarantee I'll get the message, right? I'll keep getting burned essentially trying to do this. It'd be a very costly troll to attempt. Like the further down in the queue I am, it becomes exponentially more expensive. I mean, it could easily be 1,000 times more expensive if the queue is getting large enough. Then I definitely don't want to troll. Then I want to make a sincere discussion or a sincere suggestion. Now, if I make a stupid suggestion like, rockets on the blockchain, just, let's bookmark this point in time. I tell you now, rockets on the blockchain might be the next big thing now that I've made fun of it. But so I suggest rockets on the blockchain. And the first time people might go, well, it's ill-advised. We are voting no. Right. The third time I do it, they go, okay, well, you need to stop doing this now.
Yeah.
So they might actually then just basically go no and burn this dude out. Right. Get rid of him entirely. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yep.
That makes sense to me.
Okay. And then the last option you have here is to abstain. And so basically what you're saying here is I'm still here, but I do not want to vote. And the reason that you'd want to do that as opposed to just not voting is that we're talking about putting in negligence punishments. So if you're in the governance contract, but you're not voting and you fail to vote, you should be punished for that. What form those punishments are going to take, I mean, it's just going to be burning again, but how much they're going to be is still pretty up in the air. But if you enter the governance contract, which will reward you if you're voting, but then you don't vote, you should be punished somehow. So this is just a way to sort of, you've showed up for the meeting essentially, but you're abstaining to vote. So you're doing your job.
Yeah. So part of the reason why you might choose to abstain from a vote as well is you might not have an opinion. You might legitimately estimate yourself as not being an expert in the thing being voted upon. It's not that you are apathetic about it happening or not happening, but you're essentially saying, listen, I am putting my vote behind those who are strongly opinionated about this thing going through or not going through.
Right.
So an example
just to make it really clear, I think I mentioned it, but just to make the point again, when you abstain, if I go back to this graph, this graph is unaffected. So where this blue line is, whether the thing's passing or failing, this story here that I have with 10 yes, then 15 no, then 100 yes, it will look exactly the same whether there's 0 abstain or 100 abstains or anything. It just doesn't affect this graph. So it's very much like you haven't voted really, but you've signaled that you're there and you're listening, and you're doing your job.
So an example of how can I say, not only rational but beneficial abstention from
abstinence.
Anyway, but beneficial, sort of like beneficial abstaining from a vote would be like, let's say for instance there's some complex vote on whether or not the Foundry should fund a biotech startup somewhere. So you might be a largest Foundry, like Fryholder, but you've got no opinion on this thing. It's not your area of expertise. Normally you're more into like drones and Solidity smart contracts. So you might just want to say that, listen, okay, well, I'm clearly not qualified, so I'm going to set this one out.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to back up here to delegated voting. So I think the concept is pretty simple. Basically, if we have Alice here, Bob, and Carl, and they each, they have 10, 100, and 200 Fry respectively. The basic idea, before getting into the technical stuff, is that if Carl doesn't want to worry about how to vote, but he wants to get the reward for governance, he can instead just choose a delegate. So in this case, he's choosing Bob. And Bob can then in turn choose somebody else. So in this case, he's choosing Alice. And what that will do is that every time Alice votes, she's going to have a voting weight of the total fry beneath her. So in this case, she has a voting weight of 310, and then she can vote on all these proposals. And a bit of the technical detail here is that there's going to be a delegation depth, which means that if you're on delegation depth 0, you can directly vote on proposals. If you're not, you cannot directly vote, but you can delegate to anybody who's above you, or I should say has a lower delegation depth. So Carl is in delegation depth 3, and he can delegate to Bob. But Bob and Alice both cannot delegate to Carl. Now this delegation depth you can change. In fact, let me just scroll down here a little bit. So these are just the points I wanted to cover. So first of all, as I said, you cannot delegate to a lower depth. The reason we have that is just to prevent cyclical delegations, just to prevent infinite loops and other attacks. But you can change the depth if you're not delegated. So it's not like Carl is locked into delegation depth 3. He can undelegate, that's step 1, and then he can move to some other delegation depth, and then he can redelegate or directly vote if he's on depth 0. So there's nothing locked in here. This might give the impression of a strict hierarchy, but these are completely voluntarily self-placed. There's nothing preventing Carl from moving to delegations at depth 0. And in fact, that's what you would do if you wanted to directly vote and you don't want to delegate to anybody. You would just sit yourself right in delegation 0. So that's just a bit of a technical, mechanism, but it's not really locking any kind of hierarchy in place.
Yeah, just a quick. Okay, all right. So one of the problems with liquid democracy, for why it hasn't been implemented in other platforms before, is that you have this attack where you can essentially, let's say you were Bob in this example, right? And there was no delegation depth specified. If you were Bob and you're highly trusted and a whole bunch of people basically start delegating to you, at one point what you could do is you could fake your delegation, and you could basically make 100 layers on top of yourself, between yourself and Alice, or yourself and your proxy at the very top. And what those 100 layers would do is with the Ethereum system, because there is a gas limit on how much execution there can be, you can essentially make it such that the other people below you can never de-delegate. So they can never de-delegate, and they can never check out of the governance contract. They can never.
And just to summarize that, you've made your tree so complicated that somebody else can't exit it, because the exit computation would be too much, and the Ethereum just doesn't have the throughput. Right? Yeah.
So and there have been other interventions on that which didn't seem to solve the problem. So that's like on the delegation thing. So what we've introduced here is that when you delegate, when you enter the governance contract, once you're in there, you can set a delegation depth. And what that does is that only people with a delegation depth deeper than yours, a higher number, can delegate to you, right? You can never delegate to them. So the result of that is effectively that if a bunch of people join at the bottom depth, they are still guaranteed that if they want to de-delegate, there's no way of building a tree that is gas inefficient above them that can, that can be used for the attack we just described. There is one implication I disagree with you on, and that's that only people on delegation depth 0 can vote. Because
so that's not set in stone. It's something I just kind of decided as I was putting this up. I have a hunch that I want it there, but I don't know why yet. But I feel like it might make the solidity simpler. But that might not turn out to be the case. In any case, whether you need to physically, I suppose not physically, whether you need to manually move to delegation 0 or not, anybody can directly vote, but they won't be able to directly vote and delegate at the same time. That's sort of what was making me think that. I mean, if you want to, we don't want someone to vote and then delegate their votes. Might as well put them on delegation 0. Anyway, but we can. That's more of a technical thing too.
But just in terms of the liquid democracy, so what might happen with liquid democracy, and okay, so I just want to touch on the reasons for why we're going with liquid democracy, right? So the first thing is, if we had a true liquid democracy, which we believe this is, we have a member-managed organization. So really no one in the hierarchy has disproportionate power that they didn't earn in this system. So in other words, if I'm Alice in this system and I spend all my days just evaluating in depth all Foundry related business, then it makes a lot of sense for other people to delegate to me, right? And I have, even though I don't have a lot of Fry tokens, I'm using my efforts to move, to steer the Foundry into different directions. And then with the liquid democracy, what happens is, let's say, for instance, Carl at the bottom there is, generally speaking, I mean, he has other businesses, he's got a lot of money, he's just put in money there. And one day he just occasions upon looking at this thing and he sees, but wait a minute, Alice is voting yes on this ridiculous rockets on the blockchain thing, right? So in that case, it's up to Carl. Carl can then completely de-delegate immediately from Alice. So he could then
and that just gets to my last point here, and you can continue. I just want to say that impacts all the active proposals. So if you've delegated to somebody and they voted yes on rockets on the blockchain, you can de-delegate and maybe redelegate to somebody else. But even on that first step of de-delegating, you've removed the voting weight from Alice, which actually also removes the weight from her vote on that proposal as it's going. And again, if that triggers it down to a no, that resets the 8 days and all that kind of thing. So, and what that means here, I just have a little therefore here. A powerful representative, I don't know if we should call them representatives or delegates, by the way, but a powerful person that has a lot of voting weight can't actually do much damage. It's not like they get a lot of following and then they, then they go dictator mode and whatever. As soon as they start making bad decisions, their following will exit and leave them with no voting weight.
Yeah, so it's sort of like if you think about the idea of representative democracy, where currently what happens is if you vote in the representative and you see he's doing things that you don't feel to be representative of you, then currently you don't have the option of, you can eventually de-delegate your vote from him, but you don't have the option for that period in time. Here, essentially, like if he wants to pass the NSA Universal Spying Act, which would be abbreviated Save Us All, if he wanted to vote yes on Save Us All, and then you can go, no, I don't agree with that. And then you can just either directly say, I'm voting no on Save Us All, or you could, delegate your vote to somebody who is voting no on Save Us All for that instance. And you could later on, you could reconcile with the dude and move back there if you wanted. But it's sort of, I think the big thing is it allows the stakeholders to really to specifically exit. I think the major use of this, if it ever does kick in, is to exit attacks. I think that'll be the thing. I think just mild disagreements on how good or bad a proposal is, once the guy's delegated and the Foundry's making money, I don't think there'll be a constant, battle about the nuance of a proposal. I think it'll just be, we'll get some sort of a notification saying this guy has lost his key, and whoever the key holder is now is just voting on stupid nonsense, and then people will just delegate to another reliable top level delegate.
Right. Yeah, and it's worth just talking about here that this seems to be a pretty good response to the problem of voter apathy, because if you have, well, as I'll talk about in a bit. To be involved in this, you need to actually deposit Fry into a governance contract. So this governance system will all be in a contract, and it's not that any Fry holder can do it. You have to deposit, well, any Fry holder can deposit Fry into the governance contract, but then they'll be sort of expected to vote or delegate their votes. And so with apathetic voters who just have entered their Fry into the governance contract to get the governance reward, with liquid democracy, it makes sense for them to just delegate to somebody. At the very least, delegate to somebody who will vote, whether or not it's a good vote, because then they won't get punished for they won't get the negligence punishment. But also, they have Fry themselves, and the price of Fry will be affected by the decisions Foundry makes. And so while they're making the decision on who to delegate to, they might as well, it's in their interest to delegate to somebody who will make good decisions. And that could be that could be Alice here at the top that he's heard about in the forums. It could also be his friend who's a crypto nerd, right? And then his friend is down on depth 20 or whatever, and he'll trust the further up parts of the graph to reorganize as they seem like they must.
Yeah, and I think
so just to sort of summarize, it allows an apathetic voter to still give voice in an interesting way, and in a way that is worth his time, because he doesn't need to vote on everything and research everything. He just needs to research sort of a representative or a tree he wants to be part of. And also, it solves voter apathy in a different way too, because if Alice is up here with 310 or far more votes, the fundamental cause of voter apathy, let's say in a typical representative or a typical democracy, is that you're one voter among a million, let's say, and no proposal is worth the work just rationally, because you're going to do however much research you want, and then you'll be 1/1,000,000th of the decision, and it's just so little impact, and so it's actually not worth it for you to do the research. But if you're Alice here and suddenly you find, I'm from the States, from Alaska. If I suddenly find magically that in the next election, I'm going to vote for all of Alaska, all of my state, I'm immediately motivated to do a bunch of research. And I actually don't care about politics like at all. And yet still, even I will be like, well, shit, I guess I want to do the research now, because, I'm going to make an impact here. And it does affect me, who the president of the US is, right? And so Alice is going to be in a similar position, and anybody who gathers FRI will be in, gathers a lot of delegation underneath them, will be in a similar position. There'll be a proposal that comes along, let's say it's at 65%, but they actually have enough voting weight to where if they vote no, it'll jump down to 55% and reset the timer, so that then so that's the two ways in which it solves voter apathy. On one hand, the apathetic voters can pass their vote to somebody else, and that very action will actually aggregate voting weight to people who will then find themselves motivated to vote. And this is all assuming that people are totally game theoretically rational, and they, there's going to be a lot of people who vote just because they want to. But even without assuming any sort of goodwill, only by assuming that people want FRI value to increase and that Foundry decisions have impact on that, then we should be able to pretty easily, it seems like, this solves voter apathy from these two different directions.
Can you comment a little bit on why we didn't just go with direct democracy, just everyone votes on the
Right. Sure. Well, I mean, then you have basically then you have the voter apathy problem, where people just stop showing up. And remember, you have to pay gas too to vote on a smart contract system. So there's a proposal that comes up, even if it's a proposal that they don't want to pass, and it's about to pass. If I know that my vote is just going to count for the 10 FRI that's in my wallet against the 1,000,000 FRI, and it's way more than 10 FRI away from the pass-fail line, it's just, I could pep myself up. I can give myself a rousing speech about why it's my duty, but that is not something we can rely on. And we've seen in the past with these voting systems that the voting starts low and it falls off as well if it's direct democracy, because so many people just get the feeling, and it's a reasonable feeling, that their vote really won't count, not for enough to be worth the work, even of just going and signing a transaction in MetaMask, let alone doing research on it.
There is an additional reason that I view in this thing, and that is the emergence of expertise. So if you take a system like what happened with what happens in firms is typically firms have a board, they have an executive, and then they have shareholders, right? So obviously, if you run the complex situation of negotiating with a factory in China past the shareholders, that's going to be difficult. You're going to need some expertise. You're going to need a guy who's done that before, who speaks Chinese, who's traveled, who's got experience in all kinds of stuff. You need to somehow identify that individual and somehow put them in there, right? So whether or not that's a guy who's just on the board level and who then decides that, okay, well, we need to get this vice president in to handle that part. Yeah, so that's all expertise there. But the thing is, you can't really do firm type management on the blockchain for a set of reasons that we won't go into on in this video.
But I would say just the main one is that we're dealing with pseudonymous agents. I mean,
yeah,
maybe there's more, but that's the biggest one, and that's a design goal of Foundry. Like this needs to be, every fry holder needs to be able to be pseudonymous. Specifically because we want Foundry to build things that people would feel uncomfortable putting their names on.
Yeah. Not just for the record, not bad things, good things that people would be scared that bad people will come and hurt them if they build those good things.
Exactly.
So,
like free speech is a good example.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you guys go check out smokesignal.eth/, then there's a good example there. So the thing that I see with the liquid democracy is two forms of expertise will form, right? The first thing is an expertise in picking other experts. So if you look at our graph here, Bob in this case would eventually, if a bunch of his friends keep delegating to him, and he's just like, well, I'm not going to read through all this stuff, but I sort of know Alice. I've met her at conferences and stuff, and I know Steve. They're both pretty good at it. Then he'll know about Alice and Steve and be able to like put his weight behind Alice or Steve, for instance, right? So that's the first type of expertise I see, is identifying expertise. So maybe you could, a very weak analogy would be like board level expertise. And then there would be expertise like Alice. So in other words, Alice is a extreme expert in smart contracts, and she knows crypto economics, and she knows the market, and she knows what'll fly and what won't fly. And in the system, Alice actually just taking her couple of fries that she has and just, like actually actively participating in the thing can make an enormous impact in where Foundry ends up going, and everybody else can actually like essentially benefit from her expertise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think we can move on. Okay, we already got the voting options. So the last thing to talk about is just punishments and rewards. So as I said earlier, the governance contract is it's a contract that you put Fry into. And once you put Fry into that, you're going to get a certain percentage minted for you we could say every month or every year, but I think technically it's going to accumulate every time you vote. We still don't know. I think we still have to talk a bit about the details of when specifically this accumulates. But the idea is that there will be new Fry minted for everybody who's in the governance contract, and it's proportional to what you have in there. So that's the reward. That's why you'd want to put your Fry into the governance contract. And then failing to vote results in negligence burning, where the voter's Fry is destroyed. Now, this is another thing that I have a little asterisk here. It's still undecided. So this statement itself might not be exactly what we go with. And then and even if it is, we don't even know how much we're going to punish yet. For example, we could simply say, okay, if you didn't vote on this proposal, then we're going to take away the bonus that you would have gotten if you had voted. That's sort of a soft punishment. It's really just a lack of reward. Or we could do something quite a bit more harsh. For example, we could say if you put your Fry into the governance and then you miss a vote, we're destroying all your Fry. Right, and that's conceivable too, because your job, the whole reason you're getting this plus X% is to vote on stuff. And if you can't even then come to abstain, well, then that's something that we should punish you for. Especially given that you have 8 days, and again, we could change that 8 days to maybe say 15 days, so a day over 2 weeks. So yeah, that's the last bit that I wanted to talk about here.
Okay.
Just that we're going to reward people for putting their Fry into governance. And it's those Fry specifically that will be able to vote, and that we're thinking about how do we punish people who don't vote? Because and tell me if you agree with this, Scott, but I think we need to punish people who don't even vote for example, abstain, because that's what motivates people to at the least delegate, and that will just add a lot of sort of, I would say, game theoretical assurance to the whole system, because we'll at least know, okay, everybody who comes into the governance contract will definitely want to delegate. Delegating is the easiest thing if you're entirely lazy. And if you're going to delegate, you're probably going to spend a minute or two at least, researching who to delegate to, which adds a lot of dependability to the whole system for me. Do you agree with that?
I agree with it. I think it segues nicely into us just maybe showing very quickly the process that we used with Flying Logic to map out the unintended side effects. I do want to mention that I see unintended side effects of the following, right? If we don't reward someone based on how much delegation they've got, it makes being a real expert and really going out of your way to get people to delegate to you, and writing the articles and getting the people who want to fund projects in on Foundry versus, DXDAO or some other DAO. It sort of takes away the carrot for that, right? And like the problem with the stick, the problem with both carrots and sticks basically is just that sometimes the mere fact that you're already like a participant in a certain scenario is enough for you to make the scenario want to work. Right. So whether or not you could do a better or a worse job is a different discussion, but it's enough for you to at least have a base level of, listen, I want to move this thing forward. Right. And my concern is just basically that if we don't enact very good carrots, we don't get any sort of like positive energy to I want to get a lot of delegation so that I can make a lot of money. Right. That would sort of like be my, if I was a fry holder who's just excited about Foundry projects, I'd have a base level of enthusiasm about it, but I couldn't make it a day job. It'd be cool for me if we got it to the point where it's like, oh, okay, it's so rewarding now that it's a day job. In terms of the burn.
Just on that, and I don't want to brainstorm too much on the video here, but an idea there is that if you're Alice and you've helped guide Foundry through rough times, you might be able to pass a proposal to get a salary. You might be able to just make that a proposal and just say, look, guys, I've you could give them a timesheet, back up your claim however you want. You'd probably be well known on forums and stuff. But you'd say, look, I spent a lot of time, I believe in this project, and I would like to continue this. And so here's what I'm asking you to give me. And then, in fact, then Alice could even, she could abstain from the vote herself, just for the PR of it, just for saying, look, this is up to you guys, but this is what I would like. And then you let it go where it does. And then if they vote no, Alice is free to leave, and I mean, she's always free to leave, of course.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
So I agree that's actually like a good way of working around it. And what I like about the genericity of the transaction payload is you could really that's limited by creativity. You could really deploy some pretty crazy cool stuff with just the transaction payload, of which this could be one. But anyway, I think the problem is if we don't have a reward, we just have a stick. Right. And that's part of I think lots of the staking discussions that I've seen as well is if you only have a stick, and I think people don't quite realize how strict the Ethereum 2.0 sticks are. Everyone's like, oh, I'm going to delegate. I've got 32 ETH and I'm going to run my own node and everything. The problem is just if your node goes down with everyone else's node because you didn't know what you were doing, then you're not going to get to not know what you're doing for another round, basically. Right. So part of a large part of that discussion has always been if we're too strict, then we just discourage the staking in its entirety, basically. So you want a reason for someone to go, okay, well, cool, I'll stake with this person versus, that person, for instance. So I think we should just be careful about the size of the stick. And even if it's a small hit on the stick thing, it might just discourage people from getting into the governance at all, which, I mean, it would probably be some level. There'd be some level where being too strict would keep too many people out of the governance contract, and then the governance loses its value. And not being strict enough. I think currently, and again, let's not brainstorm too much, but my current thinking is given the fact that if you don't participate in governance at all, you get diluted because the people in the governance contract constantly get a little bit more. You're probably attracted to rather go put your, go stake your fry in the governance token and delegate it to someone. You're probably already just slightly better off there, and you already have an incentive to go, but wait a minute, if people delegate to me, I actually get a default salary for getting people to delegate to me, right? Just from the, from the system. So I'll actually try and do that, like it's conceivable that if a guy has $1 million.
You're saying if there's an extra reward for being delegated to.
Yeah, for being delegated to. Whereas if we can't, and I'm not saying we can't go with some combination of these, these factors, but like if it's just a stick, I mean, if I thought about this thing as just a stick, so if I'm just a fry holder and I don't put it in the governance contract, then I never risk accidentally delegating to a guy who misses a vote and then gets me burned. So, I'd rather get out of that system. So, so that's kind of like those are kind of like, I think, the payoffs we need to think through that with. Anyway, those are the thoughts. It's too bad we didn't have as many participants as the previous 2 weeks, because then we would have a very cool Q&A session right now.
Well, that's all right. I think this is good. I'm happy to end the recording here. Or do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, I was just thinking about some stuff of the governance contract itself that we didn't cover necessarily. There was a point I was thinking about. Oh yeah,
we might have a withdraw cooldown. So I'll just share my screen just to get the image back up. But so here you can deposit Fry. We're thinking about having it be that to withdraw Fry, there's a countdown. So you say, okay, I want to withdraw Fry, and then you actually have to wait 2 weeks or 3 months or something like that. The reason we want to do that is it would basically mean everybody who's in governance, every time they vote or do any action or delegate, they're going to know that they have to be okay with whatever the price is going to be in that, 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now. So that's, we're still just discussing that, but that's something that we're thinking about. And I guess another note I could just end on is sort of, if you guys, any thoughts or criticisms or gaps here, please let us know. This is just something that we've thought a lot about, but it's still just been us. And these kinds of ideas especially need, they need feedback and new ideas. And we want this thing to be as honed by criticism as possible by the time we launch any of it. And I guess another note on that, we're probably not going to launch it all at once. We're going to be in some way iteratively building this, put some core of it out first, and then add features onto it.
I think that's maybe something else we could actually cover now as well, is just how we intend to build it modularly. Versus
let's leave that for another video. This one's already pretty long.
Okay. Can I just ask one quick thing, that you maybe just share the tree? I just want to show people the tree, and then okay, so no, the future reality tree.
Oh, I don't have that up.
Okay, hold on a second. Can you make me the host?
Yes, I can try. Make host.
Okay, let me quickly share my screen. Okay, so so essentially what we have here is so there's this thing called the theory of constraints thinking techniques. And
who's the author? Who's the guy?
By Eli Goldratt. So Goldratt with 2 T's at the end. Really worth a read, in my opinion. Not necessarily the best novels, but some of the better thinking out there. So we actually, this is going to really lose a lot of its fidelity on, unfortunately, on a recorded video. And we actually we constructed part of this thing on a very large 4K screen. But Let me just quickly see how can I. All right, so essentially what this is a cause and effect diagram. So we stated certain goals, and then we said what the desired effects would be that accomplish that goal, and then we took it all the way back to preconditions, which are things that we assume to be true about the environment, and actions, which are things that we will be implementing in our DAO. And then we also had things like undesired effects. So all of our stuff is open source. This is in our Foundry GitHub repository if you want to download Foundry DAO. And if you disagree with our logical model here, you can just basically, you know, if you, for instance, see something go wrong here and just say like an attacker will drain all the funds by just doing this simple little thing, you know, then you can,
maybe after the call, Skulk, you can actually print this to a PDF. Because otherwise, to view this, you'll need the XLogic thing, and then you need to start a free trial, which is fine if you want to do that. But yeah, the program is fine, Flying Logic if you want it. And Skulk, can I commit you to printing this to a PDF?
I will print it to a PDF, and I will add it to the same folder as the native document. But
okay, and we'll link to that in. Let's see, this is going to be on YouTube, right?
Yeah, it's going to be on
we'll
YouTube.
Link to it in the video description. Okay.
Okay. So, but the point I just wanted to make with this is that the process I see other projects taking is sort of like in-person deliberation and you know, and online deliberation through text and things like that. And I think what I like about this approach is we can build a simple system and actually reason about the side effects it might cause before we actually really start building the system. Yeah, and that I think could trim out a lot of the undesired effects that people typically face with these systems. But anybody is welcome to go look at this and interrogate our logic and tell us that we're full of it. So
yeah, and please, if any of this is confusing, please reach out to us. I mean, that would be extremely helpful. It's probably, I suspect this document is kind of intimidating to get into. Just generally, if you want to start at either, I would say start at the left, and then just follow the nodes that interest you. And this has a lot to do with governance, but also just more generally how Foundry will work. Yeah.
So I'll link you. I'll put links in all the videos on how to get us on Telegram.
Why don't you just zoom into one branch just to show people what it is that's actually going on, because this is pretty zoomed out and hard to see.
Okay, cool. Let me zoom in here. All right. So basically what this is this. So we have the goal that said viewed over a long time frame, Fry tokens should increase in value. So we want the Fry token, which represents governance in the Foundry, to increase in value over time. So we have a bunch of conditions that feed into this. So decreased supply of Fry. So one of the intermediate effects is decreased supply of Fry at a stable demand leads to an increased price. One of the actions we'll be taking is Foundry sells accumulated DAI profit for Fry in an open auction and then burns the Fry. We're not going to go into detail here. You'd have to actually follow this. It would be a whole nother video.
Right. But the way, sorry, I'll let you continue.
Yeah. And so, but basically if you track these 4 conditions, then that should be the conclusion. So in other words, if you look at this, then logically, if all 4 of these things are true, then what follows should be true.
Right, and if that's not the case, then that's something we would love to hear about. And basically, you should be able to trace this all the way back to a bunch of actions that we can take. Yeah, so there one action there is proposal votes are yes, no, and burn, and you can see that leads to the left to a couple different things. And so that's how we've tried to be a bit more rigorous about our in-person deliberations. Yeah.
And we will actually, like, we'll take this thing, I think, this future reality tree will include all the actions we take on our DAO design before we really build version 1 of our DAO so far, and this will also be updated as we update the other design parts in the code for Foundry governance version 1. Okay, but and also what I'll do in the video is I'll link again to where you can find us on Telegram and how to reach out to us and contact us if you're interested.
Cool. All right.
Awesome sauce, man.
Cool.
I'm going to end the call here.
All right.